beans and the backing beans. Both of them are nothing but the Pojo classes or the object of Pojo classes. One of them is actually bound to the properties of the, or one of them is bound to the UI component. Then in the last class I've told you that the bean is called as managed bean because the life cycle or the life of that bean is managed by the framework, and the lifespan of the bean is decided by the different scopes like request, session, application, none. And I have also told you that there is a flash scope, and in order to get this scope you have to just put a annotation. That's the only thing that you are supposed to do it. So right in front, right at the top of your class declaration, put the appropriate message, put the appropriate annotation, and the bean will behave accordingly. The other part that I have discussed in the last class was the managed beans are the link to the model. So they provide the handler for different events, as well as they help us to update the state of the model. They can also have the references to the other related beans. That means one managed bean may call some other bean within your framework or within the model. So let's proceed with the today's topic, and that is, I think this is also I've discussed. Whenever we talk about the managed bean, if the managed bean is bound to a UI component, that means to say that if you have a bean that is a backing bean that is connected to a UI component, whenever you type some value or whenever you make some modification or whenever you interact with the UI component, the values that are retained in the UI component are automatically converted or automatically transferred to the appropriate properties of the bean. And you are already familiar, beans are nothing but the Java classes, and being a Java class, you can have many different data types. So you are already familiar with the primitive data types of Java, like Boolean, double, int, long, and so on. But the UI components usually store the value in the form of a text. When you type some values within this text box, it's a text. But that has to be somehow mapped to the appropriate property of the bean, and that is done by a converters. And in the last class I have already told you, the JSF comes out with its own converters that are standard converters. You don't have to write anything, it's a part of the code library. However, if you want to create your own converters, the framework will allow you to do that. Now let's look at the different, I think this is also I've discussed. How do I specify the bean? The bean can be specified in two ways, one in the configuration file and the other one in the annotations. I think up to this point I have not discussed. I don't remember where I've stopped. So let's look at a simple application, and let's see how do we bind the value of a given component with that of a bean. So let me quickly create a JSF application. I will not take any additional components. Let me go here and let me create a Java class. And I will just call it as user bean. And immediately I'm going to get the setter and getter method for that. I'm going to add a configuration file. Don't worry about it. I'll talk about that in the practical class. This is, at least you're familiar with the struts. There will be one configuration file. How you have struts config? There is a faces config that has a configuration information. Now there are two ways of creating a bean. One is I can go to the bean, and you have already done that thing. I can make it as a managed bean. This is one way of doing it. Other one is to go to the configuration file and then get the configuration. So where is that? This one. Managed bean and managed bean. Specify the details here. Which is the class? What's the name of that bean? I'm not going to do it, and I think in the almost all demos that I'm going to create, I will not do that thing. You specify the name of the bean. This is the one that you will be using it. Say my bean. Any name you can give. And you specify the class where this bean has to be used. So I can say bean class and specify the bean class. So for example, in my case, it's there inside com dot, and I have given the name as user bean. Okay, that means to say that I'm trying to refer, I'm making this bean, I have not put any annotation, I'm making this bean as a managed bean. This is possible. Okay, you can do it in the configuration file, but most often we won't venture into that. The easiest way is when you declare a bean, you just make it as the managed bean by just putting the annotation saying that it is a managed bean, and then specify the scope. Let's say request scope. So this is now a managed bean. Two ways of doing it. You don't have to go for both the ways because it will confuse the framework altogether. Now I have a JSP page here. When we talk about the JSP page, even though we will talk about it in depth, we have at large there are two different types of tags are available. One that starts with H, the other one that will start with F. The one that starts with H is the HTML kind of tags. What is the meaning of saying HTML kind of tags? The buttons, the text boxes, the check boxes, and all of them. That kind of tags. Now, you know very well, if I just put H and I won't get a button, and you are familiar. The name of it is command button. Now, if you put this tag as it is can be shown to the browser. It has to be rendered into a rectangular box and shown it to the user. That means whatever tags or whatever component that you refer with H requires a renderer. So there is a renderer that renders this button, whatever you are writing, button, text box or anything, it will render it into an appropriate HTML format. There is one more type of tag, and that starts with F. Now these are some sort of configuration files. They are not meant to be shown to the browsers. They are there to facilitate some of the action. For example, if you want to do a validation on something, then you can use that thing. So these are called as, that starts with the F is the core tags. Now core tags are the tags that are used for either validation, converters, or this kind of things. Okay, these are just it's like a utility or housekeeping work. There is no need for renderers for this work. Whereas H are the HTML tags, and they require the renderer. Now let's come back. That's one difference. You must. I'll come back to that entire details later. Let me put a form here, and you know very well. Whenever we say that we want to send something to the server, I need a form. Now I'm going to create a user component, and you are already familiar with that. And I'm going to create a input text. Okay, the value. Usually, whenever you create a text box, you used to write the value. Now, I want to bind this thing to the bean I have just created. So there is this bean that I have created. I want to connect this bean, that is a username, with the index. So how am I going to do that thing? In order to do, you have already done that thing. This is a expression language here. Okay. You notice that this is different from the one that you are using it in the JSF. I'll talk about what's the difference between putting a dollar in front of it and a number sign in front of it. That part again, it requires a lot of explanation. As of now, that's just an expression language. Now I have to specify the name of the bean, and then followed by the property. You have done this thing. When I do this, what is that I am achieving? I am binding this text box value with that of the bean. So there is a bean. I am connecting that text box, the user component, with the Java. That is what I have achieved. So let's come back to the slide. So how do I bind the value with the UI component? For the value property, I think you can see that thing. For the value property, you give the name of the bean followed by the property. For example, input text value login. Assume that there is a bean called as login, and dot name will connect it. Now, when you do this thing, what will happen? So let me run that particular page. I'm going to put a button so that it comes back. And I'm not going to take any action. I'm going to just say value equal to submit. Let me run this application. So I type something. Let's say I type my name here. Okay. Now when I submit, what is happening? The value from this component is transferred to the bean which is here. So from this component, the value will be transferred to the bean. That is the request phase of the life cycle. So during the request phase, what will happen is when you send the request, the values from your components will be taken and will be stored in the backing beans. So let me click on it. It does that thing. When I submit this thing, it goes and it comes back. So it is going there. You can notice that it goes to the server. I've not taken any action. It goes to the server. Now when I submit, it goes to the server. Let's say, let me take this one. So assume that there is this bean that I have it here, that is linked to the, so this bean is linked here. When I click on this submit button, the value, whatever value that is here, this value will be taken from my text box and it's going to be transferred here. That is, it goes. Then some processing occurs. After that, the page is rendered back to the user. Now here, no actions are taken, so the same page comes back. Now you are sending it during the request process. During the response, what happens? So when it is sending that request back, it takes the value from here, from the bean, and it transfers it back. So during the request phase, you are picking the value from the component and transferring it to the bean. During the response cycle, from the bean, it can be modified. That value, if there is some business logic that is going on, that value can be modified. The modified values will be shown back to the user. So this is the two things that is happening. So during the update, that is during the request, data is copied from the value to the bean. When the response is given, it is taken from the bean and it is transferred to the component. So let's look at a simple example. Let's assume that you have a bean. This example will not be this kind of example. I will not try. That's why that thing is been shown here. Now I have a ordinary Java class here, Pojo class here. I don't have any annotation here. So if you have a ordinary Java class and you don't want to put a annotation, how do you make it as a manage bean? Go to this faces config and then specify manage bean. Specify the name with which you want to use that bean. Specify the class name. So this is the class, that is the login class, and this will be the name that you are going to use in your JSP or XHTML page. So this is the name. It's like a variable name. So it's like if you create, like if you want to create an object out of this, you will say login form bean x is equal to new login form bean. That x is a object of type login bean. So this is a object of type login bean, and that will be used. So you say login form bean and use this is not the setter name that has to be used. It's the property name that needs to be used there. Okay, so we have two kind of views here. If I go back to my page, if you notice here, there are two views are there. What's the meaning of saying two views? There are two places where the values are stored. One is in the component itself. So you have a component here. So let me assume that you had the same old bean here. Okay, one value is stored here. So you have a value that is stored here. Okay, so that is your model. So there is one value, and there is also one value that is stored in the other side. So what is typed here may not be available in the bean. So this bean is your model. So model has one value, view has one value. So we are having two views here, one the model view and the presentation view. So what is the meaning of it? During the request cycle, from the presentation, you have to transfer this view. Whatever, I have only one component now, you may have many components, you may have many text boxes, radio buttons and so on. This presentation view has to be transferred to the model view. So you may say that, okay, so what's the big deal in it? Just recall, what is shown here is all text. When you have a web page, everything is a text. But if you create a Java, if you have this, any Java for that matter, this one, I can even have int number. So assume that I have a getter and setter and so on. Now this is integer. So what's the problem? What is shown in the page is all text. It has to be converted into the appropriate data type. I can have a float, I can have any other data type for that matter. So when you are taking from the presentation view, when you take the value from the presentation to the model, you need to go for some sort of conversion need to be performed. So the integer which is represented in the text format has to be converted into appropriate integer format. Okay. Now how do I specify that? So how do I tell the view, that is the presentation, your XML or your HTML, that this has to be converted into something? I have to say to the framework that I require a converter. And how do I specify that I need a converter? So you have a input text, you add one more extra attribute and say that I want it to be converted into number. what is this number? This is a standard converter that is available. And I told you there is a difference. This is H, this is F. H is for rendering, F is for doing the housekeeping work. So I say that whatever value that is typed here, for example, the value you can notice over here, I'm trying to get the amount in the text box. So I want it to be converted into number. So when the text box is shown, whatever you type is a text, but I want it to be converted into a number. So I say that you have to use a converter called number. That's not the end of it. Then what I say here is, when you use this converter, see to it that it is changed in a number style of currency. That means I want that text to be converted into number. It's not the end of it. Plus, I want it to be converted into a currency format. Again, if you notice this particular thing, there is a text box. I want it to be converted into date format, but I want additional attribute, and that is I want it to be converted in this format, mm/dd. So I don't want the day name or the day number. I want the month number and the day number. I don't want, in this case, I don't want the year associated with it. So you know very well, when you write the date, you have the day, month and year. Now I'm saying that you converted it to date, but I don't want the year within that date. So this is how we use the converter. So what are these converters? Converters will convert the value from your view, that is your presentation view, to the model. Once you convert it, naturally you have to validate it. So before you do any processing, you convert the rent, or you take the amount, you convert it to integer. It's not the end of it. Is this a valid input? So for example, you may say that the age must be between, say, 16 to 25. So the user types the age. And if it is 26, it is invalid. Even though it is numerically it is correct, it's an integer value. But you may have some restriction, like the amount should not be greater than 10,000, or the amount must be between 5,000 and 6,000, or 5,000 and 8,000. You may have some range, minimum and maximum, or you may have some other condition, like the value must be greater than or less than something. Okay, so for that we require a validator. Okay, so what is a validator? Okay. Validator is used to check the correctness of the input that is supplied by the user. So here we have the struts comes out with its own standard classes for doing the validation, and these classes are only doing the validation only for selected things. If you want to do a complicated custom validation, the JSF has a pluggable validators. You create your own validator, plug them into the JSF framework, and it will perform the validator. Okay, so you can create your own validator, or you can think of using standard validators. And once you create your own validator, you can anytime register with it with one or more component and then use it. Okay. So how do I validate it? In order to validate a input, you have to associate a validator with the UI component. We will talk about this life cycle, how the pages are rendered. The validators are performed during the validation phase. As of now, just ignore this particular statement, because I'll talk about that entire life cycle, how the page is rendered from the input, how you get the output, the full life cycle. During that time, again I'm going to tell you that the validators will be used in that phase. Okay. As usual, you can have more than one validators, as well as you can nest a given component within the validator. I'm going to just show an example here. So you have a input value here, and I put two validators here. So you have an input text, you are taking the password, and you say that you use a validator, I'll talk about this validator. So there are two validators that are nested inside the given UI component. So within this edge input and /edge input, you have two validators. So let me come back to the place where I stopped. Okay. So validator tags are nested inside the component tags, and they provide the validator. Again, if you want, you can have your own validator and you can plug in into the system. So what type of validators we get? We get a range validators. For example, range validator for double, range validator for long, and so on. Also, we can get the length validator. What is the range validator? Between 10 and 15. You are giving a range. Values must be within that range. Length validator is for usually for string. You may say that the password must be minimum 5 characters. That is, the length of the string is something. And that is, or it must be minimum 3 and something of that type. So how do I put the validator? One of the easiest way to put the validator is implicitly type the validator name here. This is not going to work for most of the time. So for example, if I want the value to be required validator, I can just put it here. So how am I going to do it in my application? So I have the page here. If I want this, I can say that required is true. So what I've done here is I have just put a validator. Now if I go to this page and if I'm not typing anything, so there is a validator saying that the value must be is required. If when you say value is required and if you don't supply anything, and if I click on it, it immediately says that this value is required. However, it gives its own error message. You can anytime customize the error message, but if you don't customize it, just put the validator, it will give a standard error message. This is one way of doing it. Okay. The other way is to put the additional conditions. Like you can say the length validator or any other type of validator. How am I going to do that? I have to break open this particular, this one. So I have to open this input tag and then put the validator. Remember, the validator starts with F. I can say length validator. Then I can say minimum 5. So this is the validator. I don't have this is going to create some other problem. Sometimes it doesn't take that / directly. So what I've done here is I have put extra validator. If I remove this, what will happen? It will still work. Now you notice this time the message is slightly different. If you want to change that message, you can say here validator message. I'll say just to get that thing, just to get it so that it is not the same. I'll just go here, and if I now refresh it, I will try to resend it to get your own messages. So you can change the message at any time for a given component. It's as simple as that. You just put the message there, and whenever the validation fails, immediately you get the message. This is one way of doing it. That's a simplest way. There is a lengthiest way that you can think of using it. I'll show it slightly later. So how am I going to put the validator? Implicit way is to just, for the given component itself, put the validations like required is true. You don't get all the options here, but only the required option you will get it. If you want the message to be shown, you use H message for the ID. So this input text box, whenever you created your HTML pages, you use the one more tag called as name. So when you create a text box in your ordinary HTML, when you type something, you said text box and then name equal to user ID or something. Here we don't use that name as the attribute, it's the ID. You give a ID to the input text box, and if you want to display the error message corresponding to this input text box, you use H message for the ID that is available. So if you have some other name over here, message for the ID of the, if you have any other controls also, you can just give a name to the control and then use it. Then you can do that thing. Whenever there is an error corresponding to that component, automatically it will show that thing to you. Okay. What is the explicit way of putting the validation? Explicit way is you create the component and then you specify the validators. Here you will notice that there is a, I think you can read that thing. You notice here, this is different from the previous one. Here what I am saying is I have a custom validator method. So I am not asking, for example, if you have this minimum, maximum, required, all those things. Now I am saying in this entire example, don't worry about the previous things. Here what is being told is there is a separate bean that knows how to validate it. So you don't bother about validating. So I'm telling the JSF that you don't do the validation. I have a bean, call the method validate on that bean. Once you get the value, call validate on that bean. I have written a method there that knows how to perform the validation. In other words, if you want to perform your custom validation, you can create a bean and you can write a method in that bean that will do the custom validation. For example, a student must have a hall ticket to write the exam. That kind of validation can't be done, or that kind of validation is not available with the JSF. So how do we do it? You have to write a code for that. So you create a bean, write a code. Student is coming, if there is a student and if there is no hall ticket, then send error message. If there is student and there is also hall ticket, there is no error. You write the Java equivalent of that and then give the output based on whether you are generating, you are raising an error or not. The validator will automatically take care of it. So this is called as pluggable. You can plug your own validators into the JSF framework. So it doesn't mean that you have to use their own built-in standard validators. At any time you can override it. So how many different types of validators we have? I told you length validator. If you want to get the length validator, F is the prefix followed by validate length, validate long range, validate double. Then you also have, I've shown you two other things. These are validators, these are converters. So you know what is the meaning of saying converters. You are trying to convert a given text into number, or you are trying to convert a given text into date format. What's the difference between the converters and validators? Both of them will perform the formatting. The difference here is when you convert something, the value changes. For example, given date, you convert it into something else, the value actually changes. And the other difference is the validator will not touch it. Validator will just see and say whether it is valid or not valid. It will not try to convert it into a different format. The other difference here is validators work only with the input controls. They don't work with the output controls, because you cannot validate the output. Output just goes. What comes in can be validated, but what goes out, validators can't help it. Okay, so that's the difference. Okay. Here, this is a simple example wherein you can notice that lot of validators are being put up here, and you get the custom error message. Now what if you don't want to get their error message? The simplest way is just put the validation message and it's all done. The complicated way is tell the JSF that I have a message property. In your, just recall your Java, your struts. In the struts you created a property file and it looked like this. Just recall what you have done. You said something, welcome message equal to something. So this kind of thing, just recall. That same kind of property, message properties are also there with the JSF. So if you take the JSF, if you, I'll go to the, this is the JSF. If you want to use, this is the entire JSF jar files are available in this package. You can download it. Go to the Mahara website and you can download it. This is the latest version 2.1.2. I'll try to open it in the, let's open this. That's a jar file. All the classes, all the everything. Yesterday you added prime faces. So all the required classes, tags, everything are bundled in a single file. So if I go here, common sun faces, under resources, you get this properties. This resources. Get property. Okay, you get this properties. You notice that properties. This is the standard property. You notice here underscore es underscore en underscore de. This means to say that this is in other language. Suppose if you want to show the error message in French, then you have to create the messages, a file called as messages underscore properties. But inside that, FR is the country name. Inside that, your message must be written in the appropriate language. For example, if I try to try to get it up to this one. You notice that it is, you can't read it. Okay. This is the same message. You notice that application associated wrong call stack. If you notice, the first message is same, but this is in English. This one is in UTF format. Okay. So this is in UTF format, and I hope you are familiar with that. So this message, this is actually the, it's like your ASCII code for some Chinese character. So it's a UTF code for Chinese character. If I have, I think if I open Microsoft Word, it is not taken it. If you, this particular piece is a Chinese message. So if you are showing it for a Chinese user, you can just use that message. Every component will be there. Only the difference is the messages are in different language. Again, I can create it for French, I can create it for some other. What I have to do is I have to create the same messages, but I have to use the appropriate country code. So when a browser makes the request, along with the parameter, it also gives you this information. You have set the locale. So you have set it here. When you went to whenever you set it, you have set it to Indian format. So when your browser sends that information, it takes this information and it's going to tell, along with the HTTP request, it also gives this locale information. It says from where the request is being sent. You don't have to write any code. if you create a message with this underscore and something, if a message or if the request comes from French, the framework will automatically detect that the message is coming from France, and whenever an error message has to be shown, it will read the error message from underscore FR. So it will do it automatically. No code is required. So if the message is coming from from China, it will read the error message from here and it will show it. Suppose if the message is coming from say South Africa and you don't have that list here, in that case it will use the default. Default is without any underscore. So that means if it is not able to detect the country or appropriate country messages are not there, it will show the default message. How do I do that thing? Let me come back to the subject here. How do I do it? In the configuration file, you have to specify that I have a separate message bundle. So here what I'm saying is, you are telling the JSF that you have this message bundle with you. So the one that is coming package built with it. So it comes with its own message bundle. Now I'm saying that don't use this one, your default message, and don't try to show me this kind of error message. It is a bit difficult for my user to see this kind of error message. So I have some beautiful error messages. So whenever there is an error, read it from that. So how am I going to do that thing? If you want to override any of the error message, go to this file, select the appropriate message, create a message file. If you want to override this message, take this is your key, take that, and you have to create your own property file. In that property file, write the appropriate message. Now if you are not happy with this message, this is the key. Key must be same. You can't change the key. Value can be changed. Just type your value, not on this property file, and you are not going to save it in that location. You save it at any location and then specify it. For example, what is done over here, this is it's a bit image is a bit difficult to see. What is done over here is it is done in the Eclipse. I've just shown you one example. So somebody has created message properties and they have their own message like field required, invalid, and so on. So they are overriding the required message, conversion error message, and not valid range error message. And in the configuration file, they are saying to the struts that I have a separate message bundle, and this is your message bundle. Where you are supposed to store it is in your location, wherever you are creating your bean. Just store that message properties, the property file that you've seen it in your struts. The same property file, just create a property file and tell the struts that I have a separate property file. Whenever there is a error, in particular whenever there is a error of this type, UI input or some other type of error, don't show the default error message, don't show this kind of error message which are here, don't show this error message. I have some different error message, just show them. If time permits, we will do this exercise, otherwise you can try on your own. Okay, let's go to the next part, and that is the event handler. What is the meaning of saying event handler? We are already familiar from our swing that the events are generated by the UI component when the user interacts with it. So when you click on a button, the button fires a click event. When you select an item from the list box, a item selected event is fired. The same concept is used even in the JSF. So in the JSF, we have a listener, we have a UI component. When a user interacts with the UI component, an event is fired. You have to have a listener that will listen to the event. For example, when a button is there, if a click event occurs, why I'm finding a noise from this particular range. In that case, if you know very well, I'll go with the slightly faster option. You get the event, only thing is you have a event listener, add a event listener, and it's going to do that thing. How many different types of event listeners are there? We have a value change event listener, action event listener, data model event listener. What is a action event listener? Action event listener is done only by the action commands, and the action command is a UI button. Okay. The value changed is you can have a checkbox or you can have a list box that will handle it. Okay. Data model is when you have a range of data. If the item is selected, you get that thing. Okay. The next, let's go to the page navigation. Page navigation is when you have one page and if you want to go to the other page, how do you navigate? There is a model for that, and that model is the page navigation model. There are two ways in which you can do it. One is the static page navigation, other one is the dynamic way. So in the static page navigation, you tell where you want to go it. For example, you specify the action is equal to something. If, for example, in this case, action is equal to login. In the configuration file, you just specify if this is the action, which is the other page that you want to show. For example, here you have from the page 1, if the action is login, just go to the page 2. What is the other way of doing it? Other way is you specify the different possible option. For example, you may have two possible options. One is success and failure. How do you do that thing? In the configuration file, just go here and then specify navigation case, and you say that if the outcome is success from the page 1, go to this page. If the outcome is failure, go to the other page. And the tags that has to be used is this particular thing that is shown in the slide. Now you can associate a particular bean method along with the action. So if you create a bean and with the method that returns a string and you have some condition, you can just associate it with the command button or any other action. So whenever there is a particular action need to be fired, it will call that method. The outcome of the method will decide where it has to go. So we have two types of navigation. One is you are directly saying that if when you click on the something, there is an ID that is associated with it, just go to the other side, or you say that there are different possible cases are there. Select one among them and then just use it. Let's look at the features of JSF. Now, when we talk about the JSF, why we are supposed to use the JSF? There are some good features of the JSF. These slides are added because there can be a question. Explain the different features of JSF. One of the features of the JSF is it helps you to handle the event. Okay, so it has a built-in technique for handling the event, and there is a well-defined model for handling the event. The next one is it does the data conversion on its own. Unlike your struts or any other configuration or other frameworks, the data conversion for standard values are not performed. You don't have to do it on your own. The struts, for example, if you want to do a heavy data conversion, I have not discussed about those things. You will have to write your own technique for handling it. Whereas that is much easier with the JSF. Other features of the JSF is data validation. You have seen just by adding one or two tags, the validation can be easily performed. The next feature of it is the page navigation. The JSF helps you to easily navigate from one page to the other page. The other option, other features why we have to go for JSF is the rendering. The same page can be rendered in different ways depending upon the different renderers, and that's the one of the features of JSF. Now let's look at the architecture. JSF follows the MVC architecture. We have the model, we have the controller, and we have the view. The controller that is responsible for handling everything is called as the Faces servlet. This is the main servlet that is required for JSF. Any request from the user is first tackled by the Faces servlet. Faces servlet reads a configuration file, and depending upon what is written in the configuration file, it will redirect the response to the model as well as to the view. So the views are JSP pages. They can be either JSP pages, or you can also have the other type of pages, and they are called as facelet. There are two views that are available for the JSF. You have the facelet and the old technology, and that is the JSP. Okay, so this is a simple picture that shows you how the things work. You create a JSP page, and JSP page is nothing but it's a collection of all UI component, and you create a backing bean, and that is your model. Okay. Whenever some request is sent, the request is usually sent to the Facelet servlet. It takes the request and it calls the appropriate method within your model, and that is decided by the configuration information which is there. So based on what configuration you have specified, it does that thing. The result of this, again you have the navigation that decides how the result has to be shown. The result will be rendered back to you and shown to you in a different page. Okay. So let's look at what is there in a JSF page. The view consists of a tree-like structure. If you recall, your ordinary Swing application, whenever you created a Swing application, internally Swing is represented as a tree structure. You have the root, that is either your panel or a frame. Inside that you have all the components. The same idea is used here also. Your JSF pages that you are creating, internally it is represented like a tree structure. Okay. This is similar to the DOM structure. The DOM is the document object model that you have studied in your BCA or BSc courses. It is the same structure that is being used up. However, it is not, there is no one-to-one relationship between them. That structure is different than the the root structure, tree structure that we are using. Now there are two ways in which you can create a JSF page. One is using the old JSP technology that uses the HTML and XML like syntaxes, or you can go for the newer version, and that is the Facelet. Facelet is not an HTML, it is an extensible HTML. It's actually one of the variant of XML. XML is the base from which many other languages are derived. So Facelet is that. So what is a Facelet? Is a new way. So it can be, a question can be asked, what is a Facelet? Facelet is a way in which we declare the views of JSF pages. Okay. Facelets were introduced in the Java E6 platform onwards. The reason for that is when the JSP was introduced, it was meant to compete with the ASP as well as PHP, but later they realized that JSP can't do many things. That's why they enhanced it and made it as Facelet. Okay. Facelet, the good thing about it is entire thing is a XML, and it also supports its own expression language. Okay. So how do I use the Facelet in my application? You have already used the Facelet because I told you when you created your pages, I told you do not select JSP as your view, select JSF as the view. When you selected JSF as the view, by default it automatically started using the Facelet as your view, and that's why you notice that the file names of the pages that you create are all XHTML rather than JSP or JSF. Okay. What is the advantage of using the Facelet? The advantage of using Facelet is you can reuse by creating the template. Again, if the time permits, we will see how to create the templates and how to use it within our applications. The next part is extensibility. You can anytime extend the existing component. It is fast for the compilation, and because it is a lightweight model, you can compile it much easily and it provides much higher performance. Stop of the